Good day. Today we are going to have a lecture on adrenal corticosteroids and the gonadal hormones and their inhibitors. But we'll start the lecture with the adrenal corticosteroids. When we talk about hormonal steroids, it's usually classified according to its function. If we're dealing with glucocorticoids, these are the hormones that are intermediates for metabolism and also involved in modulating the immune function. When we talk about mineralocorticoids, these are hormones that have salt-retaining activity. And with sex steroids, these are hormones that has androgenic and estrogenic activity. In terms of synthesis and control of the function of glucocorticoids, it starts with the master gland, the master endocrine gland, which is the hypothalamus, which releases your corticotropin releasing factor, which in turn stimulates the anterior pituitary to release your adrenocorticotropic hormone. And then this stimulates the adrenal cortex to synthesize and release your glucocorticoids. Aside from promoting synthesis and release of your glucocorticoids, your adrenocorticotropic hormone also promotes trophic stimulation of the adrenal cortex cells. So which means in the absence of ACTH, the adrenal cortex cells may become atrophic. If the glucocorticoids will be in excess, this may stimulate its receptors on the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary. And once these receptors are stimulated, this will promote negative feedback, meaning the hypothalamus will not anymore release CRF, as well as the anterior pituitary will be inhibited to release ACTH. So this is how glucocorticoid function will be modulated. In terms of mechanism of action, the type of receptors of the glucocorticoids would be the steroid receptors. Remember, we have 5 types of receptors: the ionotropic, metabotropic, the tyrosine kinase receptor, the JAK-STAT receptor, and the last would be the steroid receptors. And these steroid receptors, their location is intracellular. For your corticosteroids, the receptor is located within the cytoplasm. Okay. The steroid present in the blood is usually bound to your corticosteroid binding globulin. But to enter the cell, it must exist in its free form. Okay. The intracellular receptor, on the other hand, is bound to a chaperone protein known as your heat shock protein 90 and several other molecules are attached to it. This chaperone protein actually stabilizes the receptor to keep the receptor stability. Although when these chaperone proteins are attached, they are inactive, which means they are not capable of transcription. So once the receptor, once the steroid complexes with the receptor, okay, it creates an unstable complex between the receptor and the heat shock protein 90. And eventually, okay, this chaperone protein, along with the other associated molecules, will be released and will be, because it will dissociate from the receptor. Thereby, you will now form a steroid receptor complex, which will later dimerize. That's why you call this your steroid receptor dimer, and this is the active form. So this steroid receptor dimer will now bind to your glucocorticoid response element on the regulatory region of the gene. And then this will regulate transcription by your RNA polymerase II and other associated transcription factors. And then a variety of regulatory factors may participate in facilitating co-activators or inhibiting co-repressors in the steroid response. So the resulting mRNA that will be produced, no, okay, will be exported out into the cytoplasm. So from the nucleus, it will be transported out of the cytoplasm, okay, to bring about the final hormone response, okay? And this will eventually produce a protein, no, that is responsible for producing the final hormone response. So this is how it works, no? What are the physiologic effects of corticosteroids? It is responsible for the homeostatic responses by insulin and glucagon. Remember, your glucocorticoid is part of your counter-regulatory hormones because the regulatory hormone for glucose is insulin. So which means when insulin promotes excessive reduction in glucose in the body, like in cases of hypoglycemia, it will not only increase glucagon production, but as well as corticosteroids. In terms of vascular response, it may irritate the endothelial smooth muscles and may provoke vasoconstriction. Okay? Although in the bronchial smooth muscles, it will tend to reduce the tone. Why? Because sometimes the bronchial smooth muscles are irritated by inflammation. And since corticosteroids is an anti-inflammatory agent, this may reduce the responsiveness of your bronchial smooth muscles. It can also cause lipolytic responses on the fat cells to catecholamines, as well as ACTH and growth hormones. Okay? For the metabolic effects, when you say dose-related, which means the greater the dose or concentration in the body, the greater will be its effect on the carbohydrate, protein, and fat metabolism. Okay? It is said to stimulate the phosphoenol pyruvate carboxykinase, glucose 6-phosphatase, and glycogen synthase, and the release of amino acids in the course of muscle catabolism. So it actually promotes proteolysis that will release the amino acids brought about by protein catabolism, and it will also promote lipolysis to release the fatty acids. Remember, both amino acids and fatty acids are the non-carbohydrate sources of glucose. This is the reason why it will stimulate gluconeogenesis. In excess, it may provoke glycogen synthesis in the fasting state. Okay. Definitely, as the serum glucose levels increases, it will stimulate insulin release, which will now promote lipogenesis and inhibit lipolysis. In order for the amino acids to be used up for gluconeogenesis, it will now inhibit the uptake of glucose by the muscles. Okay? The role of corticosteroids is to provide adequate glucose supply for the brain to use in times of stress. Corticosteroids is actually regarded as a stress hormone. Okay? So as I mentioned earlier, in the fats, it may stimulate lipolysis that will liberate fatty acids. For proteins, it will promote proteolysis to liberate amino acids. And with a lot of fatty acids and amino acids, you will have a lot of substrate for gluconeogenesis. And then insulin will be released that will now promote lipogenesis, inhibit lipolysis, and increase fat deposition. Okay? In the lymphoid and connective tissue, as well as the muscle, peripheral fat, and skin, okay, the effect is usually greater if you give high doses of glucocorticoids. When you say supraphysiologic, more than what is produced physiologically by the body. And because of this, since in the muscles there will be too much catabolism, it will tend to decrease muscle mass because of proteolysis. And thereby with this, eventually there will be muscle weakness. And remember, the skin is composed of collagen. Collagen is a protein, so it will also break down, which will now cause thinning of the skin. Okay? On the bones, remember, it tends to deplete the bone mineral density. How? By antagonizing the parathyroid hormone, by antagonizing vitamin D activity calcitriol. And remember, what's the activity of vitamin D? It promotes reabsorption of calcium. So without vitamin D, calcium will not be reabsorbed. So the parathyroid gland now will release the parathyroid hormone, which in turn functions to normalize serum calcium levels. So where will it get calcium? It is from the bones. It will promote bone resorption. That's why with prolonged treatment with glucocorticoid, osteoporosis is one side effect. More so if you're giving this to a menopausal woman or the elderly. They're more prone to this. Remember, its negative feedback effect is not just inhibition of ACTH release from the anterior pituitary, but it may also inhibit the release of growth hormones. That's why we are careful in giving steroids for a long time to children because of this problem. So the reduction in growth hormone release, it may also reduce the growth of children. Kaya kung pwedeng ibigay nyo siya locally, like if may asthma, inhalers, it would be better. Okay. Now, there are several functions of your glucocorticoids. One of which is its anti-inflammatory effect. How does it work as an anti-inflammatory agent? Remember, phospholipid is the precursor. And then it will be acted upon by phospholipase A2. Okay? Once phospholipase A2 acts on phospholipids, it will now convert it to arachidonic acid and the precursor of your platelet activating factor. And remember, from arachidonic acid, you will now form your pro-inflammatory agents, which are your prostaglandins, if arachidonic acid will be acted upon by cyclooxygenase, and it will form leukotrienes if arachidonic acid will be acted upon by lipooxygenase. Wait, there's more. There's a backup. If ever arachidonic acid has been formed already, it can reduce the expression of cyclooxygenase 2. Thereby, without cyclooxygenase, nothing will convert arachidonic acid to the pro-inflammatory prostaglandins. Remember, we have two types of cyclooxygenase, 1 and 2. Cyclooxygenase 1 is responsible for tissue homeostasis, while cyclooxygenase 2 is responsible to producing prostaglandins that are pro-inflammatory. So without that, it abolishes the anti-inflammatory effects that may be inherent in the body. No? It also works as an immunosuppressant. How? Okay. If you see, all those in the boxes are known as cytokines. It's like this. If an antigen is recognized by your antigen-presenting cell, as the name implies, it will present the antigen to the CD4 positive T cells. And once the CD4 positive T cells recognizes the antigen, it will undergo autocrine secretion by autocrine. This same cell will produce interleukin-2, which stimulates itself. And once this same cell is activated by the interleukin-2 it produced, it will now differentiate your CD4 positive T cells into the Th1 pathway, which is responsible for cell-mediated immunity, and to the Th2 pathway, which is responsible for the humoral or antibody-mediated immunity. And with the help of, you see interleukin-2 is a cytokine, ha? And with the help of the other cytokines such as interferon, this will all the more facilitate Th1 or cell-mediated immunity pathway, and with the help of interleukin-4, this may facilitate Th2 pathway, along with the other cytokines that will assist in converting them into the CD4 positive T cells into Th1 and Th2. So the effect of your corticosteroid is to suppress the inflammatory cytokines and chemokines. And because of this, if all the cytokines are suppressed, like all of these found in the boxes, thereby the immune response, the succeeding pathway, will be suppressed, no? And will not proceed. So this is actually what we call the clonal expansion. At the clonal expansion level, immune response is impeded. That's why it is regarded as an immunosuppressant as well. Okay. So, as they would say, no, it has profound effects on the concentration, distribution, and function of peripheral leukocytes. No? And its effect is maximal at 6 hours, and are dissipated in 24 hours, which means you will lose its effect on the peripheral leukocytes in 24 hours. No? Aside from that, no, additional pa rin to sa immunosuppressive effect niya. Remember, di ba, the white blood cells, particularly the macrophage, has to find its way out of the blood vessel to go to the site of inflammation. But how will it do that? No? It does not have eyes. It will never know where the endothelial gaps are. So it has to crawl its way, what we call margination. It has to marginate through the surface of the endothelial cells until it reaches the endothelial gaps. Now, how does margination occur? For margination to occur, there must be an interaction between the adhesion molecules of the white blood cell and the endothelial cells. These are your selectin, no? And the other one, I forgot the adhesion molecule to the blood vessels, no? And once these two adhesion molecules will interact, margination will occur, followed by migration. So which means, with the glucocorticoids, since you inhibited the interaction between the adhesion molecules, you'll inhibit margination. Without margination, there will be no migration. So the blood cells or white blood cells would remain inside the blood vessel. This is why when you get the CBC of patients on glucocorticoid therapy, you will see that their WBC count is increased. But however, there will be a reduction in the circulating lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils, which is primarily the result of their movement from the vascular bed to the lymphoid tissue. No? Kaya siya nagde-decrease because it moves from the vascular bed to the lymphoid tissues. Okay? what are the other effects, no, of your corticosteroids? Actually, at this point, we will somehow be touching on its adverse effects. No? How does adrenal insufficiency occur? No? How does it occur? Remember, what did I tell you? When there's excessive amounts of glucocorticoids, it will produce negative feedback. No? So if the patient takes in glucocorticoids, example natin prednisone, and remember, that patient has her own adrenals producing corticosteroid. With the addition of prednisone that she took, it will appear that she has excessive glucocorticoids. Hence, this will send a negative feedback to the hypothalamus and the anterpituitary. Remember, what did I tell you? Your adrenocorticotropic hormone does not only stimulate, no, production and release of corticosteroids, but as well as provides trophic stimulation to the adrenal cortex cell. So if you lose ACTH, the adrenal cortex cells will become atrophied and definitely non-functional. So you may develop adrenal insufficiency. And with this, based on EEG findings, particularly for those on prolonged glucocorticoid therapy, there will be marked slowing of the alpha rhythm in the EEG. And with marked slowing of the alpha rhythm, this is usually associated with depression. Okay? And the higher the amount of glucocorticoids taken, the greater the slowing of the alpha rhythm. Therefore, the greater the depression. So actually in humans, the behavioral disturbances with high glucocorticoid dosage is that initially it will cause insomnia and euphoria, but subsequently this will lead to depression. No? Large amounts of glucocorticoids can also cause increased intracranial pressure, which we call pseudotumor cerebri. This is due to the salt and water retention, particularly if you're taking short-acting glucocorticoids. No? So with prolonged exposure, you do not only inhibit or suppress the pituitary release of ACTH and growth hormone, kasama din yung TSH and LH. No? That's why there's eventually reduced thyroid hormone release, no? Also from the thyroid gland with prolonged glucocorticoid use. And you may become amenorrheic, particularly at high doses and prolonged intake of glucocorticoids, no? Because of the loss of LH. Remember, LH surge is important for ovulation to occur. The other effects is that it will also suppress the immune response against H. pylori. So, kasi it is an immunosuppressant, thereby the ability of the body to ward off Helicobacter pylori will be lost. This is the reason, the possible explanation why if you give glucocorticoids, there is an increased acid production in the stomach because H. pylori promotes increased acid production in the stomach. Oh, I've mentioned this already, antagonizing the effect of vitamin D on calcium absorption. That's why eventually this will lead to osteoporosis. Aside from the white blood cells, the amount of platelets and red blood cells will also increase. That's why this is one of the treatment for idiopathic thrombocytopenia and for patients with aplastic anemia to increase. No, kasi pagka may aplastic anemia, pancytopenia, ibig sabihin all the blood cells are reduced. So they are also, this is also part of the regimen because of this effect on platelets and red blood cells. For hastening of the fetal lung maturation, what we usually give are the long-acting steroids. These are your dexamethasone and betamethasone. Actually, betamethasone is better than dexamethasone. No? We prefer this. This will accelerate fetal lung maturation. We give this particularly among women in preterm labor less than 34 weeks. But now even for women who are in preterm labor at 36 weeks or less, we still give the glucocorticoids to hasten fetal lung maturity to prevent acute respiratory distress among preterm neonates. Okay. So in terms of the uses of corticosteroids, we can subdivide it into broad categories. It's used as a diagnostic tool and treatment for disturbed adrenal function. Another one is its use as an anti-inflammatory and immunosuppressant agent. And its use in stimulating fetal lung maturation. Okay. For diagnostic purposes, okay, it is said, based on this test, it is said to distinguish between hypercortisolism due to anxiety, depression, and alcoholism, which we call pseudo-Cushing syndrome, okay, and bona fide Cushing syndrome. A combined test is carried out consisting of dexamethasone, which you can give at 1 milligram. You usually give it at bedtime because remember, there is a circadian rhythm when we talk about corticosteroids. Usually, the corticosteroids peak in the morning and then later subsides in the day because remember, it is preparing our body for a possible stressful activity. So in normal individuals, you expect the cortisol to be less than 3 micrograms per deciliter because it will suppress ACTH production. Without ACTH, there will be no synthesis and release of cortisol, so expect it to be low. But with Cushing syndrome, it does not have that negative feedback effect. Hence, your cortisol will remain high, okay? So, which means dexamethasone was not able to suppress ACTH. That's why the cortisol levels remains to be high. Okay? Next would be, definitely, if you have insufficient cortisol supply what the patients lack. So you give cortisol to supply or to reverse the insufficiency. If it's a chronic disease, you can just give this orally, but in acute cases, you may need to give large doses of the parenteral hydrocortisone. But do not forget, it should be simultaneous with correcting fluid and electrolyte abnormalities, and you have to look for and treat the precipitating factors. Okay? Okay. When the patient becomes stable, you don't abruptly withdraw the hydrocortisone because you gave it large doses. You must reduce it gradually or taper it down, achieving maintenance dosage within 5 days. Because you cannot abruptly withdraw it, So if your patient may go into adrenal insufficiency. Okay. So what's the use naman if we're giving it to adrenocortical hyperfunction? With Cushing syndrome, if you give this high dose, it may be sufficient enough to cause negative feedback at this high dose. Pero kung 1 milligram lang ng dexamethasone, it will not respond, will not promote negative feedback. But with this high dose of hydrocortisone, it may promote its negative feedback effect, definitely reducing now adrenocortical activity. For the Crouzon syndrome, this is a syndrome that involves the hypothalamic pituitary axis hyperfunction. Here, there is increased production of ACTH, which will later produce hypertension. Because if you have a lot of ACTH, you will have increased glucocorticoids, which may cause salt and water retention that may lead to increased cardiac output and hypertension. Okay? And it is associated with hyperandrogenism. So your patient may also have, aside from hypertension, acne, hirsutism, baldness, and menstrual irregularity. Okay? So that's for disturbed adrenal function. Now let's move to, no? Let's move to treatment or its use as an anti-inflammatory agent. No? These are inflammatory conditions, no, that are due to excessive immune response activity. No? So actually, at this point for arthritis, bursitis, tenosynovitis, its effect is not just anti-inflammatory, but uh, the benefit of its immunosuppressant effect in terms of abating excessive immune response. Ayan. Neurologic, cerebral edema, multiple sclerosis, and inflammatory conditions on the eye. For sore eyes, yung conjunctivitis, be careful. It's better to treat the underlying cause. If it's a bacteria causing it, treat it with yung ophthalmic antibiotic, no? Instead of giving corticosteroids, because it may do harm than good. For thyroid disease, I've mentioned this, its anti-inflammatory effect may help reduce exophthalmos, as well as for acute thyroiditis. For asthma, its effect is also both, no, the benefit, no, in reversing status asthmaticus as well as in the management of asthma. The benefit here is more of anti-inflammatory if you're going to give it inhaler. But if you're going to give it oral, you may also enjoy its immunosuppressant effect. Remember, asthma is a type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. But I would just like to reiterate, for asthma, the route of choice for giving corticosteroids is inhalational, not oral. No? For GI diseases, ayan, you also give them to abate inflammation, like in ulcerative colitis. For immunosuppression, okay, yan, allergic reactions is a type 1 hypersensitivity, ano? Hematologic wise, no? No, aside from immunosuppression, di ba, for ITP, it can increase the platelet count. Okay. For malignancies, it can be used, no, to suppress the increased activity of the immune system, like leukemia, lymphoma, and Hodgkin's disease. For dexamethasone, that does not directly have the antiemetic property. What it does is it potentiates the effect. But remember, when we talk about potentiation, one drug has the desired effect. Let's say you're giving it with an antiemetic 5-HT4, no, antagonist. No? That drug class has the antiemetic effect. When you give it with dexamethasone does not have an antiemetic property, but it enhances the antiemetic property of your 5-HT4 antagonist. Definitely remember, when you have a transplanted organ, it is considered foreign. So to avoid the transplanted organ from being attacked by the immune system, you can give an immunosuppressant to the organ recipient patient. But remember, for these cases, organ transplant, you don't only give steroids as the immunosuppressant agents. To keep the corticoids at lower dose, they give other immunosuppressants with it. Ito na. These are the indications, no, for treating these diseases because of its anti-inflammatory and immunosuppressant effect. Pakisama dito yung asthma, kasama siya dyan, no? Okay? Acute flare-ups of severe skin conditions, no? And then renal disorders such as nephrotic syndrome. SLE, ha? So let's now move to kinetics. We're now through with dynamics. Okay? In a non-stressed adult, the usual production of your cortisol is usually at 10 to 20 milligrams per day. No? At 10 to 20 milligrams per day. when we talk about your cortisol, in order for it to be transported to other tissues, it must be carried by cortisol-binding globulin and an alpha-2 globulin. Thereby, the volume of distribution, kasi kailangan for it to be distributed, it must reach its target site. And to reach its target site, it must be carried by CBG. So, its volume of distribution may be increased in cases of pregnancy, estrogen, and hyperthyroidism. But remember, as the CBG increases, yes, the amount of steroids going to the target site is increased. But the problem is, if there's too much CBG, there will be less free form. So less cortisol entering the cell. And remember, in order for it to interact to its receptor, it must enter the cell in its free form. Those conditions that will reduce CBG would be hypothyroidism, genetic defects in synthesis, and protein deficiency states. No? In this case naman, you have less CBG transporting glucocorticoids to its target site, but you have more free forms. No? Okay? You have more free forms. I failed to mention here, your ACTH follows a circadian rhythm. It's actually released from the anterior pituitary by pulses. The pulses peak in the early morning, as I've mentioned earlier, because remember, corticosteroids are stress hormones. It's released in the early morning to prepare your body for the possible stressors of the day, and usually after meals. Now, albumin has a large capacity but low affinity, kaya 5% lang siya, for cortisol. And for practical purposes, albumin-bound cortisol is considered free because they are loosely bound to albumin. Okay? Synthetic corticosteroids such as dexamethasone are largely bound to albumin rather than CBG. Okay? 1/3 of it is excreted in the urine. They're mostly metabolized in the liver. So when we classify steroids, it is classified according to how long its action would be. Okay? So when you say short to medium acting, under this you have your hydrocortisone, cortisol, prednisone, prednisolone, methylprednisolone, and meprednisone. Those that are intermediate acting are your triamcinolone, paramethasone, and fludroprednisolone, while the long-acting ones are your betamethasone and dexamethasone. If you look at this, the greatest anti-inflammatory activity will be for the long-acting. While when we talk about salt-retaining capacity, no, this is more of a property of your short to medium acting. Remember, there is some semblance in the structure of your glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids, no? Particularly the short to medium acting ones. That's why they also have salt-retaining activity. But when we talk about intermediate and long-acting glucocorticoids, they do not have any salt-retaining activity. In terms of half-life, no, 60 to 90 minutes ang normal half-life niya. And it tends to be longer for the synthetic glucocorticoids like hydrocortisone. Half-life becomes longer if you administer hydrocortisone at greater amounts. When you subject the body to stress, remember, kasi with stress, you produce a lot of cortisol. So it's just like exposing the body to higher concentration of cortisol. And remember, with hypothyroidism, what did I say? There is decreased CBG. And with decreased CBG, you have a lot of free forms. And remember, with liver disease, the problem is there will be slowing of the metabolism of hydrocortisone. So it tends to accumulate. Again, you're exposing the body to greater concentration of hydrocortisone. So these are the conditions that would tend to prolong the half-life of hydrocortisone. I've mentioned this already. Huh? So let's go to the interactions. No? These are just, I did not actually mention there, but there's a lot. There are a lot of drug interactions, but I chose the pertinent ones. No? When we talk about barbiturates, phenytoin, and rifampin, the commonality between these agents is that they are all enzyme inducers. Remember, corticosteroids is metabolized by the microsomal enzymes in the liver. Okay, so with this one, there will be accelerated metabolism of corticosteroids. So what will happen to its plasma concentration? It will go down. Thereby, it will affect the efficacy of your corticosteroids. Efficacy will also go down. Because when you accelerate its metabolism, it will not be able to reach its Emax or its maximum concentration. Definitely, efficacy will be reduced. So you need to, let's say your patient has TB, pulmonary tuberculosis, but at the same time as SLE. So the patient needs a steroid. You may just adjust the dose of the steroid. Remember, when we talk about estrogen and progesterone, which is contained in the oral contraceptives, they have salt-retaining capacity. And remember, if you give a short to medium acting agent with it, its salt-retaining activity will be greater. In terms of risk for GI ulceration, because remember, NSAIDs also increases gastric acid production, no? Because you abolish the protective effect of PGE2, and diba, NSAIDs, with NSAIDs, you will reduce the synthesis of PGE2. PGE2 is protective to the GI tract. Thereby, there will be increased acid production. Remember, as I mentioned with corticosteroids, because of the reduction in the eradicating capacity of the body to H. pylori, because corticosteroids are considered as immunosuppressants, GI acid production in GI tract will also increase. So it will be more marked if you're giving NSAIDs with it. Remember, with your short to medium acting glucocorticoids, they have salt retaining capacity similar to mineralocorticoids. The salt retaining capacity is that they reabsorb sodium from the distal convoluted tubule, but they throw out potassium. So you may develop hypernatremia, but at the same time, you're losing potassium. So if you give thiazide and furosemide, which also promotes hypokalemia, this effect will be enhanced. Remember, the vaccines and toxoids are given so that the immune system will be able to respond well when exposed to the particular agent that is related to the specific vaccine given. But remember, since your corticosteroids reduces the immune response, thereby it's useless to give the vaccines and the toxoids because you will not be able to provoke an antibody response. Actually, when we talk about corticosteroids, I've already discussed the effects. So the effects of corticosteroids is synonymous to its side effects. No? In terms of adrenocortical insufficiency, no? It is produced with prolonged use of steroids, or for example, your patient is taking 20 milligrams per day of prednisone and took it for 2 weeks or more. That is already enough to cause adrenocortical insufficiency. More so if your patient took it for 6 months or even longer. So as I mentioned earlier, with the intake of exogenous glucocorticoids, synthetic glucocorticoids, this will appear as if your patient has excess glucocorticoids. Hence, this will promote negative feedback. You will lose ACTH. Without ACTH, there will be atrophy of the adrenal cells. Actually, it will take 2 to 12 months for the hypothalamic pituitary axis to return to normal for those patients who took steroids for a long period of time, and another 6 to 9 months for the cortisol levels to normalize. Remember, you remove the pro-inflammatory activity. You see, the pro-inflammatory activity are also responsible in promoting wound healing. But since you reduce that, so wound healing may be delayed. Plus, since this is an immunosuppressant, there may be an increased susceptibility to infections. As I've mentioned earlier, there may be fluid and electrolyte imbalance. You retain salt, sodium, as it is reabsorbed, no, by the distal convoluted tubule, and you throw out potassium. So you may have, where sodium goes, water follows, so you may have fluid retention, hypernatremia, but you will have hypokalemia. And because of the fluid retention, you may have increased cardiac output, hence you increase the blood pressure. And because of fluid retention, if your patient is prone to develop congestive heart failure, this may happen. Now, how did muscle pain or weakness develop? I think I mentioned this earlier. Remember, there is protein catabolism in order to release amino acids to be a source of gluconeogenesis. So remember, with catabolism of the muscle protein, this may cause muscle weakness and muscle pain. I've mentioned already this, di ba? Because it inhibits the activity of vitamin D, thereby calcium reabsorption will reduce. Hence, with decreased calcium in the bloodstream, your parathyroid hormone will get calcium from the bones by promoting bone resorption in an effort to normalize serum calcium levels. I've mentioned this already because remember, with negative feedback, you don't only reduce the release of ACTH, but you also reduce the pituitary release of growth hormones as well as LH. That's why you have amenorrhea, and TSH. That's why you may have hypothyroidism. I mentioned this, diba? Because of gluconeogenesis, no? Your patient will be prone to hyperglycemia. And because of water retention, this may increase intraocular pressure. Because of protein catabolism, the catabolic products of proteins may deposit in the lens within the lens of the eyes, causing cataract formation. Okay. Dami niyang side effects, no? That's why we don't give steroids left and right. No? This is an effect of increased acid production that will also cause gastric and esophageal irritation aside from nausea and vomiting. No? And then later, with gastritis, with erosion, it may become an ulcer and then later bleed. No? Aside from slowing of the alpha wave, I failed to mention that with CRF release, you don't only promote release of ACTH from the anterior pituitary, but you also release the beta endorphins. Remember, the beta endorphins are considered as the happy hormones, or the hormones that give you a sense of well-being. So when there's negative feedback, you lose CRF. So you don't only lose the ability of the pituitary gland to release ACTH, but beta endorphins as well. With regards to bruising, easy and skin thinning, and tearing, ito yung stretch marks. If you're giving corticosteroids for a long period of time, no, you will observe that there will be stretch marks sa skin. Yung dark areas, these are areas of tearing because of skin thinning. Remember, there will be protein catabolism, and collagen on the skin will also break down, thinning the skin. So what would be the contraindications? Sa dami ng side effects, what will be the contraindications to the use of corticosteroids? No? Okay. Long-term use. Actually, this is what is being avoided, long-term use. And for example, your patient is on long-term steroids, avoid abrupt discontinuation, or else your patient will develop adrenal insufficiency and worse, may go to adrenal crisis. Your patient will present with flu-like symptoms and become dehydrated, and usually this is where they die, no, when the dehydration will not be corrected. When they have infections, active infections, because remember, this is an immunosuppressant. So the ability of their body to ward these infections off may be lost. Ganun din with fungal infections. Remember, di ba, with hypothyroidism, no? Or cirrhosis, there will be an exaggerated response. Why? Remember, with this condition, di ba, they tend to have prolonged half-lives. So the steroids tend to accumulate. That's why, di ba, the greater the concentration of glucocorticoids in the body, the greater the response or the effect. Hypertension and or congestive heart failure, because these are conditions that will worsen with fluid retention, which your corticosteroids produces. Remember, di ba, this makes your patient prone to depression. Yan. So, contraindicated yan, no? The glucose control will be very poor when your patient is on glucocorticoids, because this can cause hyperglycemia. And remember, glaucoma is a condition wherein the intraocular pressure is increased, and this may be aggravated by your glucocorticoids. So moral lesson, we just don't give glucocorticoids left and right because it has a lot of adverse effects. Okay. Oh, so those with peptic ulcers, this may be aggravated. In children, it's not absolutely contraindicated, but what we prefer, if we really need to give steroids, like in cases of asthma, what we would prefer would be the inhaled form. Now, for other conditions that would require systemic or oral steroids, you just need to monitor the children. Even for pregnancy and lactation, it is not contraindicated. When it is necessary, you can give it. No? Yung history of thrombotic disorders, this is not really common for glucocorticoids. This is more of a side effect coming from your estrogen, your sex steroids, no? Estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So what would be the special precautions? No, again, avoid long-term use. But if your patient is on long-term glucocorticoids, you need to avoid abrupt discontinuation. And while on glucocorticoids, you must always monitor for hyperglycemia by requesting for FBS periodically. Yan, urinalysis to check for glucosuria. Can also check the electrolytes, sodium and potassium. Check the BP. Ask for if they have experiencing bone pain, muscle weakness. Ask them if they're having symptoms related to peptic ulcer or if there are any hidden infections. Again, as I've mentioned, pregnancy and lactation is not a contraindication for glucocorticoid use. Once it's needed, you may give it. Okay. For your mineralocorticoids, okay, the natural mineralocorticoid, aldosterone, the rate of secretion depends on ACTH release and even angiotensin levels. Because remember, the precursor of aldosterone is angiotensin 2. Physiologically, it promotes reabsorption of sodium from the distal convoluted tubule. This was what I was telling you earlier. And from the cortical collecting tubule as well. They're loosely coupled to the excretion of potassium and hydrogen. That's why with mineralocorticoids, you take in sodium, but you throw out potassium, and hydrogen goes with it because hydrogen is loosely coupled to potassium. They have similar receptor affinity with cortisol. The naturally occurring form, the half-life is 15 to 20 minutes. Okay. The only synthetic derivative of mineralocorticoid is fludrocortisone. It increases the expression of your sodium-potassium ATPase and your epithelial sodium channel, which is responsible for the sodium-potassium exchange. Now, the half-life is longer. This kasi is synthetic. Okay. It's clinically used. This is the only indication for adrenocortical insufficiency associated with mineralocorticoid deficiency. If you'd look at the side effects, it's similar to your glucocorticoids. And the severity of the side effects depends on the dosage. The higher the dosage, the more frequent you give it, and the longer the time you give it, the side effects will be greater. Particularly, more prone to the side effects are the elderly individuals. Let's now go to the antagonist of adrenocortical agents. If you look at the antagonist, the commonality among them is they inhibit a certain portion in the biosynthesis of your adrenocorticosteroids. Like for aminoglutetimide, it blocks the conversion of cholesterol to pregnenolone. In the same way, no, by inhibiting cholesterol side chain cleavage, and this is similar to ketoconazole. But ketoconazole tends to inhibit more enzymes. No? Its inhibition extends to the enzymes that are also important in synthesizing the sex steroids. That's why ketoconazole is regarded as a non-selective inhibitor of adrenal and gonadal steroid synthesis. It's most effective in inhibiting steroid hormone biosynthesis among patients with hypercortisolism like those with Cushing syndrome. But the major drawback is its adverse effect, which is hepatotoxicity. Now, for aminoglutetimide, this eliminates also the production of estrogen because it works at the beginning. It inhibits the formation of pregnanidiol, or pregnenolone, which is the precursor of all of the steroids, mineralocorticoid, glucocorticoid, and sex steroids. It's used before for breast cancer, but it has been largely replaced by tamoxifen. I just wrote here the common adverse effects, but this is more common at high doses. Dexamethasone reduces its half-life, From 4 to 5 hours, if you give dexamethasone, its half-life goes down to 2 hours. For etomidate, it is used off-label for hypercortisolism. This is not anymore available, trislotane. It's nice to know na lang because they found out this is more effective in dogs than in humans. Abiraterone is the newer agent. It is only used for refractory prostate cancer, which means prostate cancer that did not respond to the usual treatment, such as your, which we will discuss after this, which are your androgen antagonists, okay, and GnRH analogs. Yun yung choice first. But if prostate cancer does not respond to those agents, you can give abiraterone. It blocks your 17-alpha-hydroxylase and your 17-antilyase, which is not just responsible for gonadal steroid synthesis, but as well as adrenal synthesis as well. So similar to ketoconazole, it both inhibits the synthesis of adrenal and gonadal steroids. But there's one associated action of abiraterone. There is a compensatory increase in ACTH observed when you give abiraterone. This is due to the lack of cortisol being formed, thereby the body will recognize this as deficiency. So in an effort, it will produce a positive feedback that leads to now production of ACTH. To prevent this compensatory increase, you do not want that, especially if you're inhibiting adrenocorticosteroid synthesis, You do not want that. So to avoid the compensatory increase in ACTH, you can give dexamethasone concomitant with it. So you can give it to suppress dexamethasone to inhibit the compensatory increase in ACTH. For metirapone, nice to know na lang to because it has been withdrawn in the market. although it inhibits cortisol and corticosterone synthesis, no, it also inhibits androgen synthesis, but it's already withdrawn from the market. Mitotane is also nice to know na lang because it was also withdrawn from the market. No? Okay, so if you look at this, no, okay, if you look at the antagonist of adrenocorticosteroids, they actually antagonize its activity by inhibiting their biosynthesis. But there is one agent that does not inhibit the biosynthesis, but it acts as an antagonist. How? No, this is mifepristone. Its name before is RU486. No? What it does is it works at the receptor level. It stabilizes the heat shock protein 90 and steroid receptor complex. Remember, when this is stable, no, what happens is that even if the steroid attaches to the receptor, heat shock protein 90 and the associated molecules will not detach. And remember, if heat shock protein 90 and its associated molecules are still attached to the receptor complex remains inactive. And it will never activate the glucocorticoid response element. This is how it works. So this is the only agent that, no, no, antagonizes your adrenocorticosteroids at the receptor level. The rest, they work as antagonists by inhibiting the biosynthesis of adrenocorticosteroids. Now, it's used for Cushing syndrome secondary to ectopic ACTH production or adrenal CA. No? These are the adverse effects. No? This is the reason, yung vaginal bleeding, it can cause uterine contractility. So it has a potential to be used as an abortive fashion. And this is the reason why we do not have mifepristone in the Philippines. A long time ago, I forgot the year, no? Pero it's more than 10 years already. This was supposed to be marketed in the Philippines, but the Catholic Church intervened because the problem in our government is the regulatory mechanism. So if mifepristone use will not be regulated, its use may be abused, and there is a potential that it can be used as an abortive fashion. That's why it's not available in the Philippines. For the mineralocorticoid antagonists, okay, its mechanism of action involves its ability to compete with the aldosterone receptor. Hence, since aldosterone will not be able to bind to its receptor, its peripheral effects will be reduced or inhibited. No? Okay. Among the three, the one that is considered to be a progesterone derivative is drospirenone. Drospirenone is a progesterone derivative with mineralocorticoid antagonist activity. I tried to look for the details of its pharmacokinetics, but I wasn't able to find one. What I found are the pharmacokinetics associated with spironolactone and eplerenone. Okay? Almost the same naman sila, except that in terms of half-life, it's longer for eplerenone, shorter for spironolactone. They're both metabolized by the cytochrome P450 enzymes. It's spironolactone that has an active metabolite, so it compensated with with the shortness of its half-life. No? Okay? They're both excreted in the kidneys. No? Yeah, and there's an additional function for spironolactone. It has an antagonist, no, activity to androgens, no. Okay. No. When you compare spironolactone, eplerenone from spironolactone, in terms of mineralocorticoid antagonist activity, eplerenone is more selective. Because spironolactone has other activities. That's why if you would look at its action, eplerenone is more concentrated, its clinical use is more concentrated on the management of severe CHF and essential hypertension, while spironolactone, aside from that, it is used to treat hirsutism or excess androgen, since it also works as an anti-androgen. It's also used for primary aldosteronism. Spironolactone is better given with food, while eplerenone can be given with or without food. Definitely, since it's a mineralocorticoid antagonist, it is a potassium-sparing agent. That's why the side effect is definitely hyperkalemia, which is usually milder with eplerenone. Because of the non-selective effects on other sites, that's why it has more adverse effects. So because of its anti-androgenic effect, it may cause gynecomastia in males. It can cause cardiac arrhythmia, menstrual irregularities among females, and the others. While this one has less adverse effects as compared to spironolactone. So I've mentioned the only use of risperidone is for contraceptive, no? It's part of a component of a contraceptive. I'll discuss that when we go to the repro agents, no? So in terms of drug interactions, no? Okay, those that would tend to inhibit, no, your CYP3A4, no, will increase the concentration of eplerenone. So if you're giving itraconazole, which is an azole derivative, ritonavir, which is used for the treatment of HIV, and clarithromycin macrolide with eplerenone, its plasma concentration would tend to increase. While if you give St. Chancellworth with it, which is an inducer, its plasma concentration would tend to decrease. Remember, your mineralocorticoid antagonist, since it reduces salt and water retention, it may promote hypotension. So it may potentiate the effects of your vasodilators. And in terms of, since it promotes hyperkalemia, NSAIDs and ACE inhibitors are also agents that promote hyperkalemia. Thereby, this may be enhanced if you give these agents. So that ends the lecture for adrenocorticosteroids, mineralocorticoids, and their antagonists. So the next part of the lecture will be the reproductive agents, which will be recorded separately. Thank you.